Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about Aeschylus The Persians, but not Aeschylus' version, Robert Auletta's version. So this is a contemporary take on the Persians. This premiered in 1993, and that's a significant piece of information because Auletta's version is very much concerned with the modern world. It's very much set in the context of the first Gulf War between the United States and Iraq. And we get this very, very clearly. Some of the things, we have very specific modern warfare references. We get references to America. We get references to the United States. But at one point, early in the play, we have an extended choral section that opens the play. And then at one point, we get a description of an attack. And the stage directions say, "Suddenly they freeze." That's the chorus, freezes. "Focused on some mysterious sound. Now bombs and rockets begin to explode all around them." So we have this very modern approach to warfare. And we have this described in even more detail later on when we get the messenger who comes in. And he describes the slaughter of the Persian army. And there are all of these very specific references to things that happened during the Gulf War and also Vietnam, etc., etc. So, like, tank killer gunships plowing through us, gutting us like cattle. Our vehicles themselves suddenly exploding and blazing, their very armor shrieking. We've got 2-foot steel darts tipped with depleted uranium having plunged right through them, their very flesh and bones liquefied by the heat. Invisible stealth bombers, monstrous B-52s carpet bombing. So we've got these very specific references like B-52s, stealth bombers, depleted uranium. All of these things telling us this is clearly modern warfare. This is not the wars described. This is not the wars of the ancient world. This is not the conflict from Aeschylus' The Persians. We've also got some references that tell us this is specifically the context of the Gulf War. Like, when Atossa, the mother of King Xerxes, asks why the Greeks / Americans, this is one of the areas that's a little confusing, and I'm going to talk about that more in a bit. When Atossa asks why they didn't stop as they were slaughtering the Persian army, the messenger says, because they had not yet destroyed Xerxes. They said that he was insane, a madman intent on assembling a horrendous nuclear arsenal, a potent danger to the stability of the region and the world, and a sadist and a murderer who enjoyed slaughtering his own people. In the chorus, Atossa has a denial of that, but then the chorus says, but he often did such things, killed tribesmen in the hills and others in the swamps. So this is interesting because Saddam Hussein's use of chemical weapons against his own citizens was frequently cited as a pretext for both the first Gulf War and the 2003 invasion of Iraq. So we have those things. The other thing that we have that tells us this is Gulf War specific is that the motive of the attackers, that is those attacking the Persians, is identified as trying to gain control of oil. So Atossa asks, what do they really want from us? And the chorus says, they want what lives under the desiccated, searing, fruitless skin of our land. Its hidden life, treasure, those dark, lubricating, percussive, sacred, slippery fluids. Civilization's dark emollient. Atossa says, yes, our oil, but they have their own, don't they? And the chorus says, not enough. Their paranoia constantly tells them never nearly enough. And Atossa says, then we'll give it to them and avoid. And the chorus cuts her off and says, quite frankly, they would now rather have war, hold us down and slash us open, and with the red comes gushing the dark life of our soul, quite easily separated from the squalor of our agony, then efficiently transported by pipes, barrels, or freighters back to the victors and their machines. For in their eyes we are barely human. They'd like to see us all slaughtered. So this is a war for oil, which is one of the weird problems with Auletta's version, I think. So not only in the sense that this completely abandons the actual history of Aeschylus's Persians and the events that are depicted therein, in which the Persians specifically go to invade Greece, to conquer it and incorporate it into the Persian Empire. In order to try and make his political point about U.S. military aggression, U.S. imperialism, Auletta has to abandon that idea to a certain extent. But he doesn't really abandon it enough, and so we get a play that's rather incoherent, because it opens with the chorus of Persian elders basically being like, yes, we've built up a massive army. Everyone in Asia, meaning everyone in the Persian Empire, has gone to fight the Greeks. We will conquer them. But then the focus really shifts to the Greeks are coming to attack us, or the Americans are coming to attack us. We are being invaded. And so we have that weird contradiction there, because it's a contradiction both in the sense that they refer to Athens as the aggressor and they refer to America as the aggressor, but they also, the chorus and Atossa, spend a tremendous amount of time talking about how they are sending their military out to conquer, but also about how they are under attack from outside. And Auletta doesn't really reconcile those two things. I mean, you've got, on the one hand, and I mean, this is just a contradiction, I think, of the political project that he's trying to engage in with this version of the play. On the one hand, you've got the framework given to us by Aeschylus, which involves the Persians as the aggressors. On the other hand, you've got the structure that Auletta wants, which is the Americans as the aggressors and the Persians as the Iraqis, which is also kind of ironic considering that the descendants of the Persians would be the Iranians, and the Iranians and the Iraqis are vicious enemies. I mean, not too long, about a decade, a little more than a decade before the Gulf War, Iran and Iraq were in conflict with one another. Like they had a brutal war with one another. So we've got all that stuff going on. The other thing that I think is really interesting in this version is the discussion of television, because I believe the Gulf War was the first war where live footage was played on TV. Like, in Vietnam, the war was broadcast on the news, but everything was filmed and then shown later. I believe the Gulf War was the first time that news stations in the US aired live footage from battlefields. So TV was really important. Like, the role of TV in shaping the way that Americans conceptualized this war was incredibly significant. And we've got some interesting references to it. So, in one, after Atossa is describing her dream, and this is a variation of the one that's described in Aeschylus's version. In her version, there's a fashion show, and there's one model representing Europe, one model representing Asia. The model representing Europe turns on Xerxes and viciously attacks him. And toward the end of this description of this dream, Atossa says, "Is this on television? I'm trying to change the channel. Are millions of people watching this? Furiously clicking the control. I don't want to see anymore. I don't. And then, yes, I finally managed to do it. A different channel now. But there again is Xerxes, lying in the desert this time, bloody and beaten, with his father Darius standing over him. And in his eyes one sees pain and pity for his son." So we've got that idea of the violence, the war being depicted, and in some cases the very traumatic experience of seeing that conflict play out on live TV. But on the other hand, there are questions about how sort of efficacious or horrifying it actually is to see war on TV. Because at one point, when they're discussing the victors, the Americans or the Athenians, when they eventually go home, the chorus says, "Some of them will never give it a thought because most of them did not actually see what they did. Why don't they put it all on television? The sight of our dead, the screams of our agony, and let the world see the fruits of their labor." And Atossa replies, "Because if they did, if the world actually saw, then it might be stopped." Now that's an interesting idea. This is, of course, intuitive in a way that, like, if we were to collectively witness horrific events on television, we would oppose them. But that's one that did to a certain extent happen with the Gulf War. There was some degree of anti-war sentiment, largely driven by people actually seeing these things on TV and being horrified. But one sort of counterpoint to this, or one reason that the anti-war movement was not that big compared to, say, the Vietnam era anti-war movement, or even the anti-war movement with the invasion of Iraq in 2003, is because the way that TV depicted the events in the Gulf was very similar to what Americans were used to from action movies. And so actually this comes up. The Messenger brings up a number of American action movies. Rambo, The Terminator, Lethal Weapon, Men of Steel. These films that depict violence, depict gore, depict death, and glorify it in many cases. Americans were simply used to seeing violence on their TV and movie screens, and it simply didn't make the impact that it otherwise might have. And Auletta is drawing our attention to this. I mean, this is definitely a version that's critical of the American war effort.